Hi everyone. Today I am taking a bus ride from my apartment here in downtown Oslo up to Maridalsvannet, or the Mary Valley Lake. It's the freshwater lake that provides drinking water to about 80% of Oslo's population. I never really gone up here much. There's another lake in Oslo that I prefer to walk around, which is called Sognsvann. But as I walk along Hausmannsgate, which is the street where I live, over to the bus stop at Jakob Church, Jakobskirke, which is a church that is no longer in use as such. It's a concert venue. I thought I would, tell you a little bit about what I'm looking at. And here I'm looking at some concert posters for the festival coming this summer. Øya Festival. So this is Vulkanparken, named after, I think, a pump station called Vulcan on the Akerselva. So Akerselva, or Akers River, is the river that runs all the way from Maridalsvannet through through the entire city in a north to south axis and ends up in the Oslo fjord. And I guided my work colleagues along this river a few years back and, talked about various things and the old factories. And this is kind of where the Norwegian Industrial Revolution started. But a fun fact about the whole thing is that this river, which was called Frisja in, back in the Norse age, is now called Aker after, the former municipality that surrounded Oslo, or even Christiania as it was once called, and provided drinking water to the fortress, at the north end of the Oslo fjord, in Oslo, called Akershus Fortress. And but if you go back in history and prehistory, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age finally gave up its grip on Norway, and of course then also the Oslo area, then the Oslo fjord would have stretched all the way up through what is now the city of Oslo, and the Maridals Lake would actually have been the northernmost part of the Oslo fjord. And then when the land started rising up, when all the weight of all that ice that had been pressing down on Scandinavia for tens and tens of thousands of years melted away, the land started rising. So even though sea levels rose as a consequence of the ice age ending, this was in some way compensated by the land mass, rising as well. And that basically then stranded Maridalsvannet as a lake instead of the northernmost part of the Oslo fjord, which I think is a pretty interesting history. We're talking a pretty big height difference. So as you can see, I'm now traveling through the northernmost part of the city itself, just before we reach the forests, and just a few hundred meters and we're suddenly into farm country. So I am going to go and get off at a stop called Kirkeby. I've never been here, and this is where the church, or the church ruin that I'm looking for, is. And here you see the northern tip of the Maridalsvannet, and we'll start walking up to Margaretakirken. So the Margaret Church was a stone church built around 1250 in Maridalen, here in Oslo, and it was dedicated to Margaret of Antioch, who also gave her name to the valley. Maridalen is a contraction of the older name Margaretadalen, the Margaret Valley. The church fell into decay starting in the mid-1600s, and now only the ruin remains. Following restoration, it stands as a prominent landmark here in Maridalen, boasting a beautiful location, as you can see, by the lake Maridalsvannet. The church ruins are now used, among other things, as a stage for the Maridalen plays, or Mariadalsspillet. Saint Margaret of Antioch was the patron saint of married women and women in childbirth. She is said to have been executed in 307 after refusing to marry the Roman governor Olybrius. While there are a few other dedications to her in Norway, her cult was not common here until the late Middle Ages, when she was counted among the 14 holy helpers. The fact that a church was dedicated to her as early as 1250 and that the entire valley was named after her is therefore quite special. It is difficult to find an explanation for this, beyond guessing that there may have been personal reasons behind it for whoever funded the church building. References to Margareta Virginis confirm that it is Margaret of Antioch and not Margaret of Scotland, who was canonized around the same time the church was built. The church began to slowly but surely decay as early as the Black Death in the mid-1300s. It is first mentioned in a written source around 1390. Maridalen was hard hit by the plague, and of the 18 farms that used to be in the valley before the Black Plague, only one remained inhabited after it had passed. A dedicated parish church was therefore hardly necessary until the population recovered. And during the Middle Ages, the church was subordinate to St. Mary's Church, or Mariakirken, which is the ruins I visited in an earlier video downtown in Oslo. The farm next to it, Kirkeby, is thought to have served as the rectory, and it may have been cleared before the church was built, but it received its name once it became associated with the church. The farm was also owned by St. Mary's Church. So, in 1598, sources state that services were held here only 3 times a year, and the last service is said to have taken place in 1643. Here's a small model of the church as it is thought to have looked, because parts of the walls don't reach all the way up to where it originally was. There is some confusion as to what would have been the actual height of the church, and the shape of the roof. But I thought this would be an interesting little trip back to medieval Norway and when we were Catholics, and a time that from before we were part of Denmark and all that stuff. So hope you guys enjoyed this little trip with me up to Maridalsvannet and on the last day of Easter. Hope you enjoyed this. Please click like, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.